to begin? Start with this thing. Okay, so it's like a family tree thing, and we find right away all kinds of spoilers. Right here we see that William Herondale and Tessa Gray marry. Will died in 1937. Tessa is still alive. We knew that from City of Glass. We also see that Jem is still alive to this day, which was nice. And both the Herondale family and the Carstairs family are both related to Jace. Tessa's and Will's son James marries Cordelia Carstairs. Also, technically, the Lightwood kids, Alex, Isabel, and Max, are all related to Will as well because Will's sister Cecily marries Gabriel Lightwood, and it's something. Anyways, the book. 1873, where Will and Jem meet for the first time, and it immediately feel bad for Will, having read the previous books and knowing what exactly Will was going through at that time. And then we jump to Tessa getting ready for her wedding with Jem, and you really bad for Will. And then Jem just comes running in. Charlotte hides Tessa behind the wardrobe. And then we jump to the training room where Cecily is trying to convince Will to write their parents. There are just people running all over the place trying to get everyone into the main room of the institute. Apparently Benedict Lightwood is a worm. But then there's this giant argument about who is going to go and fight this big worm and who's going to stay. Of course, Cecilia wants to go because she's a shadow hunter now. Tessa wants to go because she has had training. She doesn't want to go. She doesn't want Jem to go without her. Of course, Tessa's still in her wedding dress. So I don't think you can fight because you're wearing a wedding dress. For what it's worth, I don't think Will could fight in that dress either. Perhaps not, but I would make a radiant bride. Oh, Will. So they end up killing this giant worm and apparently killing Benedict with it. And so the Lightwood kids are all upset because their father just died. And yeah. The Infernal Devices are without pity. The Infernal Devices are without regret. The Infernal Devices are without number. The Infernal Devices will never stop coming. Bum, bum, bum. So the Infernal Devices are actually Mormon's automations. Let's talk about Jem. After the battle with this big worm, Jem starts coughing, and everyone knows that when Jem starts coughing, it's not well. So they rush him home, and Will finds out that Jem is running out of Yin-Fin. So Will starts going all over town trying to find more Yin-Fin for Jem, and Cecilia ends up showing up and just following him around. Then there's Sophie and Gideon, and Sophie is the servant, and Gideon orders scones from Sophie every night. Sophie ends up falling on the floor and sees under Gideon's bed and finds this mountain of scones. Apparently Gideon doesn't like scones. Sophie was upset. While all this was going on, Gabriel was in the room, but he was asleep. And as soon as Sophie leaves, he's like, "Nicely done, brother." Gideon threw a scone at him. And then we're down in Henry's little basement experiment area. Apparently, the portal didn't exist until this point, but apparently Henry just invented it, and he's working on it right after the battle. But they start arguing about what to name Charlotte and Henry's baby. Henry really wants to name him Buford. It's actually going to be the baby's middle name. The full name, Charles Buford Fairchild. But Henry made an automatically rocking cradle, and he ended up turning it up, and the cradle ended up going smacked right into the wall. So then Tessa and Will are trying to figure out how to keep Jem alive. They consider Silent Brotherhood. They consider becoming a Downworlder. All that would separate Will and Jem. And Jem can't exactly become a Silent Brother because his Yin-Fin would kill him. And there's no cure for it. So Will and Tessa end up going to Manus Bane. We see a lot of him in the Mortal Instruments series. We see a lot of him in the Infernal Devices as well, but he's a lot more fun in the Mortal Instruments. And throughout the whole book, there are a bunch of letters, mostly from the Council to the Inquisitor, and To the members of the Shadow Hunter Council. All these letters are just kind of basically, what is Charlotte going to do? What is she going to become? Is she going to become the council after the Wayland's death? There's no known cure for Gem, even when they do go to Madness Bane. Skip ahead a little bit. The Shadow... Okay, so the Silent Brothers end up coming to visit the Institute, and right behind their carriage is a carriage of automations, and we see Mrs. Black. Last time we saw her, she was just ahead. But while all the other shadow hunters are busy fighting off these automations, Mrs. Black goes and takes Tessa, and they bolt out of there. Jem is like the only person to notice, and he goes and runs after the carriage. He doesn't have a horse, and so he ends up losing them pretty quick. Jem ends up running back to the Institute, and then he just like passes out. And they're all freaking out because he's all entirely Abby and thin. And what are they gonna do? I don't want you to die, Jem! So after a while, Madness Bane ends up showing up, and he agrees to watch over Jem while Will goes to save Tessa. They have high reasons to believe that Tessa is in a certain location that I don't know how to pronounce. But before Will goes, he has a conversation with Madness, where Madness asking Will about his love for Tessa. Madness allows Will to have a few minutes with Jem, even though he's still asleep, and all of a sudden, Jem wakes up and says, "I am not dead yet, Will. What did Madness mean by asking you if I knew you were in love with Tessa?" Okay, so Will ends up going after Tessa. Jem gave him permission to go after Tessa. So he gets on a horse at like midnight and just rides off in the direction of wherever the location is that I can't pronounce. So Tessa is in the carriage with Mrs. Black, and she's like really freaked out because Mrs. Black is just ahead. She ends up beating up Mrs. Black and getting out of the carriage, and she ends up rolling down the hill. They're at the bottom of this very steep hill. There are like really sharp rocks, and so she thinks that she's going to die. And then her angel pendant just like comes to life and grows into like a full-sized human thing, and it slows her descent and saves her life. It's some weird stuff. So apparently pretty quickly, Will actually ends up in that same approximate location that Tessa is just laying there. And she thinks that she hears Will calling out her name, but she's not sure. And by the time she is able to put the pieces together, he's already out of there. But Tessa ends up walking, and she comes across this cabin thing. I am heavily reminded of Controlling Chaos right now. But she goes inside, and she wraps herself up in a blanket, and she goes to sleep. And Will is just riding along, and he stops at this hotel for a night. And all of a sudden, he just feels broken. He feels hollow, and it's just so sad to read. Mostly because you know what's happening, but you don't want it to be true, and Jem is dead. So you already have a slight feeling you know what's happening because the Silent Brothers took him away, but you don't really know for sure, and then you remember that he said that he can never become a Silent Brother because of the infant. And then Will just becomes so hollow. Worsley Scott, the werewolf dude, convinces him to do what Jem wanted him to do, which was go after Tessa. So Mortimer ends up catching Tessa in the cabin. Actually, it's Mrs. Black and a whole bunch of automations. She wakes up in this little room, and she starts walking towards the door on the far side of the room, and her head she just like smashed right into something. Magic. Actually, it really is magic. Mortimer put up this like glass thing. He could walk in through one way, but he can't walk out the other. So Tessa's kind of trapped. And Mortimer convinces Tessa to use Mortimer's father's watch, because Mortimer's father was a warlock, and write down a spell for him so that his automations can become all powerful. Mormon promised to send Jem all of the infant. Of course, we already know it's way too late. Tessa doesn't know that, and she does it anyways, and she is an idiot, and yeah. After some time, Will ends up showing up in Tessa's room, and they both think that Jem is dead now. Well, Will thinks that Jem is dead, and tells Tessa that Jem is dead, and it's all sad, and so the next day, Madness shows up, and he had traveled through Henry's portal. It works! They end up running out. Madness had broken the spell that had the glass thingy-majigger so that they could go all the way through the room, and they left. Henry was playing with this bots, and apparently the bots woke up automations. So the one automation woke up and grabbed Henry, and I was about to cry. Madness is able to bring Henry back to life, but his spine is broken. And they end up killing a lot of the automations, but they're not capable of killing all of them. Apparently, Henry has this device that can, like, not kill, but, like, deactivate them. There's still a couple that don't really feel the effect of it, but most of them just kind of. And the Mormon has one of his still working automations bring Tessa to him. And Tessa grabs her necklace, her angel pendant. We already know that there's like an angel soul stuck in there, and she reaches for that angel soul, and she becomes an angel. Or maybe the angel becomes her. But she kills Mortimer, and then she loses the angel, and somehow she manages to survive, even though just about anyone else wouldn't. They would essentially be burned alive. And that actually reminds me a lot of what happened to Jace in City of Lost Souls. At the end, he's covered in like heavenly fire, and so anyone that touches him might potentially be burned to death. Anyways, well, during the battle with automations, I should have said this before, we see Jem as Brother Zachariah. We see Brother Zachariah in the Mortal Instruments series quite a bit. After the battle, Tessa ends up recovering, and Brother Zachariah shows up and visits with Tessa and explains everything. He says that they waited until the very last second to change Jem into a silent brother, and so there wasn't enough yen fin in him to kill him with, yeah. And Jem is no longer like silver hair, silver eyebrows, and all that. He apparently naturally has black hair. I really don't think I'm going to be able to be used to him having black hair when I'm so used to picturing him with silver hair. Okay, so maybe a normal person can, but I can't. But Jem makes an agreement with Tessa that once a year on the day that they first kissed, that they would meet at the place where they first kissed. And so every year they do that, except for Tessa and Will end up marrying, and they stay together until Will dies in 1937. Of course, we know that they have kids because obviously it leads down to Jace, where it's related to both Will and Jem. And in the epilogue, it's 2008. Tessa is just kind of remembering everything that happened since the end of the last chapter until Jem shows up. Well, Brother Zachariah, who is now officially Jem, because he's found a cure, and so he is back to being a normal shadow hunter person. That tells me that in the Dark Artifices series, there will be no Brother Zachariah. But I do wonder if there will be a Tessa and a Jem there. On one hand, you're really happy that Tessa and Jem get to have a happily ever after too, but you miss Will so much. And well, on one hand, I'm really glad that Jem survived because I love Jem. I also love Will, and I don't want to. And this also makes me wonder what year is City of Heavenly Fire going to be set in? Because the first one was set in the exact, I think it was in the year that the book came out, and we're not skipping with each year that is, and I don't know what year it was. I highly doubt that's going to be set in 2014 or 2015 or whatever year that book is coming out. I forget whether she's going to be releasing the first Dark Artifices series before or after City of Heavenly Fire. Anyways, yeah. reading the book was a very emotional roller coaster. Infernal Devices, Moral Instruments, Dark Artifices, and whatever the last one is that I don't remember the initials to, but it's supposed to be in between the Infernal Devices and the Moral Instruments. In the Dark Artifices, we see a descendant of Gem. So yeah, and that is all. Bye! Bow ties are cool.